सर एक सेकंड उसे शादी पे हटके ले बस कहीं पुलिस वालों को शादी गाड़ी
A tear gas fell on his face. He's bleeding. Tear gas. A 70-year-old man has been injured. Tear gas fell on his face. अंकल जी कैसे लगी आपको? कैसे लगी है? ये तो मैं थोड़ा मारा ही। वहाँ से आपको यहाँ पे? सत्ता वाला जान के मारा मैं। There are continuously tear gas shells being thrown.
Agriculture is the primary sector of employment for almost half of the labor workforce in India. This population defines their sense of rootedness to farming as a livelihood, a culture, and an identity. But when it comes to the future of agriculture, the sector is continuously declining, and the response to new agricultural bills passed by the Bharatiya Janata Party or the BJP under Prime Minister Narendra Modi in September 2020 has struck what is now called the largest farmers' protest in India.
I can't think of many people who would have imagined that a farmers' protest of this scale, of this magnitude, with this political weight and impact would actually happen in India within the next few months.
In early June 2020, 3 ordinances had been promulgated by the BJP under Modi. Farmers from the state of Punjab, one of the most fertile regions of the country, began protesting on a small scale from village to village. Shortly after, farmers from Haryana joined the protests, making the protests widespread across the 2 neighboring states.
The whole of Punjab was engulfed by this movement, but the rest of the country didn't know very much about what was happening. This is when singers, artists, everyone came in. In a small geography, cultural and ideological hegemony was created for the movement. Everyone was on the same page. This had already happened by 20th of September in Punjab.
By September 2020, these ordinances were converted into bills for the enactment of 3 acts passed by the Parliament of India. The first act eliminates the trade barriers and pushes farmers to sell their crops beyond the government-regulated markets, getting rid of their protection from the minimum support price, or MSP, which is a set price that ensures a standard for farmers. The second act takes away food crops from the essential commodities list, allowing private buyers to hoard produce and invest in food processing and storage facilities. The third act promotes the prefixation of price through contract farming and intends to get rid of the middlemen from the value chain. All 3 laws change the ways in which the agriculture industry has been operating for decades.
Reforms, to me, are things that would improve the quality of an idea or, livelihood of all stakeholders, all people benefiting equally. In this case, this is not a reform, so it's almost hard for me to even use that word. So these ordinances, then, knowing that the benefit is simply on economy, that's again, questionable who it benefits, because the farmers certainly don't, then these conglomerates. And so then you just wonder why they have more citizenship and rights than the farmer. why that implicates everybody around the world and why it should be an issue globally is because this movement towards neoliberal capitalist modes of being and how that impacts society is something that actually threatens each and every one of us. And so if it's something that we're thinking, oh, it's happening there and it's not something that concerns our backyard, we have to really think about it critically and say, well, if it's being done there, it has been done in the US to the detriment of the agricultural economy there. Latin America has similar cases. Why would we think that we are safe from the possibility of this happening?
Even here in Canada and the United States and Australia and other parts of the Western world, you have seen large agribusinesses and big businesses taking over large chunks of the supply chain in multiple verticals. Agriculture, of course, is one, but there are also other verticals. And this pushes out smaller participants from the economy. It polarizes the economy from what I can tell from my perspective of being either laborers / consumers or the owners of these very large enterprises. And of course, as you know, that is it's a very skewed affair.
Farmers in Canada have been through, over the last number of decades, the loss of a number of market regulation mechanisms, like the single desk marketing for the hog sector, like the loss of the Canadian Wheat Board for wheat and barley marketing out in the West. We understand the devastation that deregulation like that can have on family farms, and transferring a food system from being a food system to being a commodity production system forces farmers to take on more risk and more debt, and it can be devastating.
Life has changed at the rural sector. You have small towns have become ghost towns, have emptied out, and so what these things teach us is that the same things can also happen in Punjab. If you have ghost towns in Iowa, you will also never get ghost villages in parts of Punjab, because you just won't have a sustainable, viable way of living in these rural areas. And it's only a matter of time before everybody leaves either two countries like Canada, the United States, where you already have mass exodus through emigration, or people, they leave to cities such as Delhi and Bombay or other parts of India, where they can now, ply their trade as laborers and sell their labor on the market.
These three laws are an opportunity for the government to sell land, essentially, or to give a monopoly of agriculture to the Ambanis and Adanis of the world. And the farmers are acutely aware of this.
With the help and coordination from farm unions, from September 24th to October 23rd, farmers from Punjab, Haryana, Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Kerala, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and more united for a rail roko or stop the trains program. Reports reveal that landless laborers, Dalits, and those against the National Register of Citizens and the Citizenship Amendment Act actively participated in the movement. Collectively, they managed to block the train operations, with some services cancelled and others terminated for a total of 3 days.
दिन से आप लगातार चल रहे हैं।
आज 4 दिन हो गया 50 दिन ਦਾ ਚੱਲਦਾ ਰੇਲਾਂ ਤੇ ਬੈਠਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ 50 ਦਿਨ ਰੇਲਾਂ ਤੇ ਬੈਠਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਸੜਕਾਂ ਤੇ ਬੈਠਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ 4-4 ਮਹੀਨਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਜੂਨ ਸਰਕਦੀ ਆਪ ਇਹ ਸੌਂ ਰਿਹਾ ਵਾ ਐਸੀ ਲਾ ਕੇ ਕਮਰੇ 'ਚ ਸੁੱਤਾ ਹੈ ਮੋਦੀ।
After the rail roko, the farmers decided to take their protests a step further by marching to the capital city of Delhi to gain the attention of government officials. They called the movement Dilli Chalo, or Let's Go to Delhi.
तो अभी कहाँ तक जाएंगे अब आगे?
दिल्ली तक जाएंगे, दिल्ली फतेह करेंगे।
तो आगे पुलिस वाले रोकेंगे तो
तोड़ देंगे सब कुछ।
मरेंगे।
भाई पिछे 15 जने ने थामे रोक लिया 15 ਦੇ 15 ਪੱਟ ਗਏ ਆ ਕਿੱਡੀ ਕੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ ਯਾਰ
5 ਲੱਖ ਦਾ ਇਕੱਠ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਬਾਈ 5 ਲੱਖ ਦਾ
5 ਲੱਖ ਦਾ ਇਕੱਠ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੋਂ ਚੱਲਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ 15 ਕਰੋੜ 15 ਬੈਰੀਅਡ ਪੱਟਦੇ
50000 ਟਰੈਕਟਰ
ਸਵੇਰੇ ਨਿਰਣੇ ਕਾਲਜ ਬੈਰੀਅਡ ਪੱਟ ਕੇ ਫੇਰ ਰੋਟੀ ਖਾਧੀ ਆ।
On November 26th, tens of thousands of protesters gathered at the Singhu border, leading towards Delhi to peacefully protest against the farming reforms. As they proceeded across the borders of the city, the police responded with tear gas, water cannons, and physical abuse in an attempt to stop them from entering. Yet the protesters remained, continuing their entry to further their protests. The repercussions of these laws caused fear among the tens of thousands of farmers who make up almost half of the labor workforce in the country. For many of these farmers, it is not their first time demanding for security and support from government. Many of them have participated in numerous agricultural movements prior to today's farmers' protests. In 1905, during the time of British rule, revolutionary Indian dissident Sardar Ajit Singh fought against the British regime on behalf of the poor and famine-stricken regions of India. Singh and his brother Kisaan Singh worked in impoverished regions like Madhya Pradesh and in Ahmedabad and areas of Srinagar and Kangla. In 1907, Singh was arrested and deported by the British government for leading a farmers' movement called Pagdi Sambhal Jatta, a movement against 3 British agricultural laws: the Badi Doab Canal Act, Punjab Land Colonization Act, and the Punjab Land Alienation Act. Singh's legacy, resistance, and deep connections to land live on in many of the farmers who continue protesting across India today. In 1943, the Great Bengal Famine and the crisis of famine-induced epidemic diseases took place in India. The crisis took the lives of 3 million Indian citizens who died of starvation, malaria, famine-induced epidemic, and other diseases. Those who survived the famine faced an economic recession and fall of social status as they sold their land and belongings in desperation for food.
India experienced a significant agricultural decline during the late 19th, early 20th century, and through the 19th century actually. And you had serious famines in India during the first half of the 20th century. Punjab was a different story. Punjab was the region where the Britishers actually set up canal colonies. They invested in developing agricultural infrastructure in Punjab, partly because they had their own interests in developing Punjab agriculture, because they wanted to settle the soldiers who had fought for the British, and they wanted to give them land. So lots of Sikh farmers actually, from Sikh cultivators, from the eastern side of Punjab were taken to the western side of Punjab, places like Layalpur, Mint Kubri. These were called canal colonies. These were new settlements where these people, mostly Jat Sikhs, they were given large tracts of land, and they were, in some sense, asked to develop those lands agriculturally.
In 1947, the British rule of India ended, and India partitioned into 2 independent countries, India and Pakistan. During this time, the United States of America provided food supply to India, which later formed close ties between India and the USA's agricultural research and reforms area.
Now, this is also the region which at some level sees first major irrigation project after independence, the famous Bhakhra Nangal Dam project, which actually started, it was conceived during the colonial period, but it was developed by the first Prime Minister of India, and he described it as the temple of independent India. These were kind of symbols of new developmental state, which also invested heavily in agriculture, because agriculture was seen as a major kind of source of India's weakness, because they needed to depend on food grain imports from United States of America, which came with certain kind of conditionalities.
From 1951 to 1956, India's first 5-year agricultural plan was implemented to further develop the agricultural sector. In 1959, the U.S. Department of Agriculture published a report on India's food crisis with steps to resolve it. The report encouraged usage of new agricultural technologies to increase the output of agriculture.
The biggest problem at that time, as they understood the American bloc, was food. And they then invested in developing technologies which would help these countries to, at some level, develop their agriculture. And that's how the idea of what we know as Green Revolution was developed. And it was developed to counter, at some level, the growing influence of the Second World, which was led by then Soviet Union. And many of these countries were poor countries, and they were actually attracted to socialist model of development. But Americans also realized that, and they came in and gave a lot of aid and introduced new kind of technological solutions to food problems.
By 1965, the Green Revolution began in Punjab for its known history of agrarian practices. Punjab farmers became the first to adopt high-yielding varieties of seeds, chemical fertilizers, and irrigation facilities with a focus on the production of wheat, rice, and cotton. From 1965 to 1972, this resulted in a significant increase in Punjab's wheat production, reporting the rise from 1.9 to 5.6 million tons. Following the growth of production in 1965, the Agricultural Prices Commission was formed, which is known as the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices today. This government agency ensures the MSP and informs it in the Mandi system. As a result of the Green Revolution, in 1970, Punjab produced 70% of India's total food grains. Due to the overproduction of food grains from 1970 to 1980, Punjab's economy became ranked the highest compared to other farming states. Therefore, from the mid-1970s to 1990s, the use of mechanized farming strategies led to uneven wealth among the farming states.
So in order to incentivize farmers, they also introduced a new kind of procurement system directly from farmers through commission agents, and there were new marketing centers which were set up in each kind of set of villages from where Government of India would procure whatever food grains are produced at a price which was higher than the market price, which was called as the minimum support price, so that farmers are incentivized to switch over to production of food grains rather than producing other cash crops. So Punjab became a land, Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, where wheat was produced conventionally, but also a little bit of paddy was produced. But eventually it became a very kind of attractive crop because paddy rice price was very good in the market, and Punjab also began to export its high quality basmati rice. So paddy becomes a kind of attractive cash crop, and then that has a kind of negative impact on the ecological system of Punjab because this region doesn't have that much groundwater, and canal water was limited, but people begin to kind of pull out groundwater from underneath. It's actually not simple wells. These are deep down, and that water is being taken out, and this is kind of very dangerous ecologically for Punjab. It's not sustainable. So overall growth rate of the economy went up from like 2-3% to 8, 9, 10%, 11% also. So Indian economy grows in the 1990s and the first decade of 20th century, but that has a kind of negative implication on agriculture. With globalization, food grains are available from wherever you want to buy. So agriculture becomes dispensable. You don't really need to worry too much about food because even if there is food scarcity, you can just go to Australia and pick up as much wheat as you want to at a price cheaper than the price that you pay to the farmer. So, and that's the time when Indian state stops investing in developing any kind of further infrastructure, further kind of investments in agriculture. And from 90s onwards, farmers' incomes begin to decline. And there is a kind of broad, what we call as, in India is famously called as the agrarian crisis. Lots of farmers have been committing suicide all across the country. And they are most frequent in regions which were integrated in the market economy, those who are producing agricultural cash crops.
करीब करीब पिछले 21 साल में पूरे देश में 24 लाख से ज्यादा किसानों ने सुसाइड किया है। 24 लाख किसान, तो ये लगा के चलो कि एक साल में करीब 1,20,000 से 1.25 लाख किसान के आसपास आत्महत्या कर रहा है। ये ऑन रिकॉर्ड नहीं है, ये क्योंकि जो इसका रिकॉर्ड है, रिकॉर्ड इसका कम है, रिकॉर्ड होगा करीब 4 लाख का आदमी का, क्योंकि वे मानते हैं उसको जो आत्महत्या करता है कि जिस किसान के नाम पे जमीन होगी, अगर वो सुसाइड करता है और उसका पीएम होता है तो उसको सुसाइड ये मानते हैं। जिस महिला ने आत्महत्या करी, जिस के बच्चे ने आत्महत्या करी, सुसाइड करा, क्योंकि अगर जमीन है बाप के नाम, पिताजी की उम्र है 80 साल, लड़के की उम्र है 50 साल, तो सुसाइड कौन करेगा? लड़का करेगा। उसको किसान मानते नहीं, क्योंकि उसको अपने बच्चों की शादी करनी, उसकी बच्चों की उम्र है 20-21 साल, लड़की की शादी करनी, बाप पे पैसे है नहीं, फसल बिकी नहीं, तो बापा तो 80 साल का, उसको तो पता ही नहीं कुछ भी, तो सुसाइड कौन करेगा? या तो माँ करेगी या बाप करेगा जिसकी 50-52 साल उम्र है, तो उसको फार्मर्स नहीं मानते। महिलाएं सुसाइड करती है तो उसको किसान नहीं मानते क्योंकि उसके नाम जमीन नहीं है। तो अगर हम पूरा किसान फैमिली की सुसाइड लगाए तो 24 लाख से ज्यादा बैठती है वो।
From the 1980s to today, negative consequences of the Green Revolution began to show. Farmers felt pressured to take high-interest loans in order to purchase pesticides, seeds, and irrigation systems. Furthermore, the uncontrolled use of fertilizer pollutes water, soil, and wildlife. Due to direct exposure to pesticides, Punjab citizens have become victims of abnormal increases in cancer rates. In addition to this, a mental health crisis has struck among farmers, with more than 10,000 farmers and agricultural laborers committing suicide, as reported by the National Crime Records Bureau in 2019. Following the negative consequences of the Green Revolution, the growing debt for farmers, and the widespread corruption in agriculture, the economy in farming states is continuously declining.
If you look at this issue in India, it actually has global ramifications. If you really look at it and pause and just think to yourself, you have these regional farmers who are trying to hold on to their way of life as family farmers, and they're among the last vestiges around the globe of family farmers who are able to make a sustainable living, actually picking up a plow and going to their fields and watering their crops and cultivating their harvest. There's not many farmers left like that, particularly at the family level in the United States, in Australia, where there's been deregulation. Family farmers have been pushed off the land, and you have large agribusinesses that have taken over their parcels simply because small farmers are not able to participate in what's become a much more capital-intensive type of industry.
For us to believe that traditional modes of economy are still valid and perhaps should be more encouraged in this day and age when we are collectively faced with such large climate concerns. The other thing is that the environment impact of such farming tendencies have never yielded a benefit for anybody. And with COVID being such a remarkable incident that affects all of us, you can't help but think about food security and food justice, how this all works and how this weaves together with our daily lives. If we don't have food security around the world, a lot of our food does not come from Canadian soil, it comes from abroad. So this very much impacts our quality of life here as much as it impacts the quality of life of the farmers that are still protesting. So I think that we have to really look altruistically and think about how this impacts all of us as a global entity and how it also impacts our home, Mother Earth.
India is trying, and I don't blame the government for this, India is trying to also develop as a country. It's also trying to develop economically and, if not keep abreast, even exceed the pace of development that its neighbor China has experienced over the last 3 decades. India has aspirations to be the next super global power after the Chinese. And they also have their own regional issues to be concerned about in terms of an increasingly aggressive and assertive Chinese state. So India needs to develop. But where the Chinese succeeded by creating a manufacturing sector which drew people out of the country from rural areas into cities and into actual jobs where they're able to make that transition, India has not been able to create that manufacturing sector in urban parts of the country, at least not nearly on the scale that China was able to do so. And so there seems to be a sort of cruelty to India's reform bills in this particular case, because aside from the fact that they did not consult with any farmers' unions about the reforms, there isn't, and there's also, it seems to be a concerted effort to push agricultural workers out of the agricultural sector. But the government has not provided any policies that would provide them a place to land.
I think people have to choose if we're on the side of capital or if we're on the side of people. And that's going to be the question. And that's going to be the question moving forward. Are we on the side of capital and capitalism, or are we on the side of people?
The brutality faced by the protesters struck concern for many Indo-Canadians who have families, friends, and close ties in the country. Immediately, the Indo-Canadian diaspora brought attention to the crisis in India over social media in Canada. They spread photos and videos of the protesters. Content revealed peaceful protesters being attacked by tear gases, water cannons, and physical abuse by the hands of the Haryana police. It was not long until hashtag #IStandWithFarmers became trending on Twitter. It was not long until hundreds of social media accounts were made in support of the farmers. It was not long until the protesters gained the strength and support from international citizens in their social movement. The voices of these farmers spread from the small villages of Punjab to the busy highways of Delhi to now the large streets of British Columbia, Canada, in a matter of seconds.
We went to the Mansa and Sanghera district of Punjab, and there I met a woman and her family, and her daughter was telling me, we thought ke ye to bas Punjab Haryana border tak jayenge, isse zyada kya chale jayenge. That's what they thought, and then finally it took off from there, and it's like 9 long months now into it. So nobody believed it. So I think that's why it is important to everyone to record it, no matter how they want to do it, whether documenting it in the form of music, literature, but it needed to be done now. And so that the future generation also know that something like this has happened. And even when you talk to the farmers from Punjab, they also speak about कि अगर हम प्रोटेस्ट नहीं करेंगे तो हमारे बच्चे क्या what will they say, वो क्या कहेंगे कि आप लड़े ही नहीं हमारे लिए, कि आपने हमारी जमीनों को ऐसे ही जाने दिया.
No farmer! No farmer! We support!
I know lots of people have seen either signs or referenced slogans like I am the daughter of farmers, or I am the son of farmers, or no farmers, no food. And it's instigated a conversation and kind of prompted them to look deeper into the issue. So I think it's a conversation starter. It's an opportunity to learn. And I think sometimes you can find avenues of relating to certain issues through these opportunities as well. So, right now we're in Alberta, and a lot of Albertans, even if they're not from a Punjabi background, and if they've got a long lineage here, often have roots in farming. So we've had lots of people come up to us and reference those roots to us and being like, absolutely, we resonate with that slogan, no farmers, no food.
Like when the farmers protest first started, I did make clothing on it, and it did sell merchandise, and all of that did go to Khalsa Aid, like 100% of the profit. So it's kind of like a nice way to get the community connected and then also represent like what the movement was. And then with that, a lot of feedback that I got was just individuals would be out doing their day-to-day things, and they'd be wearing the clothing, and they would get questions from people outside of the community asking, oh, like I've been seeing a lot of this, what is this? And it like sparked the conversation, and it provoked people to like question what's going on.
Loki puch rahe a, why is the world's largest protest still going on? That's something that we can do by living all the way out over here in different parts of the world, by raising awareness. So meri aap benti hai, main bas ehi kehna chahna, just try to advocate for why we're still protesting, why there are still 250 million farmers protesting in India.
I think one of the main reasons we had the affinity to organize or be even motivated to organize Kisaan Sleepouts as second generation Canadians is because we're not that far removed from the farming culture. It's very integrated into the Punjabi culture that our parents have raised us in Western countries. And not to mention, we still have family members and friends and family that are not only fighting at the protests in person right now, but also continuing to farm. And we see the struggles within our own family. Our parents, a lot of us even have moved to Canada just so that we can provide for our families that are still remaining in India, who can't escape the environmental disasters or the debt burdens or just crop failure that leads to the poverty.
And for the people who have literally left their lives behind to give us everything. When something means that much to them, it's hard not to feel connected to it. It's so interconnected in our cultural experience from our parents. And I think it's transcended our lives here, even though we may have been raised in Canada. So it's hard to feel separated from it.
I'll be singing till I die. No farms, no food. I see the image clear and the way that it moves. I see my brothers and my sisters fighting against the cruel, thrown in jails, they've been beaten, abused. The truth is that 300 are dead because of your power ring. But you see the money and that's when you cowards sing. Targeting the crown is the game for you clowns, because 100,000 ain't got nothing on Singhs, and that's true. Just the way of the show. Democracy's a joke and that's the truth that we know. But unity is power, that's the way of my folks. Cause you can break our bones but not our souls, and that's facts.
Only 4 days after the violence struck in India, on December 1st, 500 vehicles rallied at the Strawberry Hill neighborhood in Surrey, BC, and drove towards downtown Vancouver, stopping at the Consulate General's Office of India. On the same day in India, the government held a meeting with the leaders of the farmer unions to suggest organizing a committee to further study the issues caused by the reforms, and the leaders of farmers' unions declined the settlement. On the same day, a convoy also took place in Victoria, BC, leading towards the Legislative Assembly of BC. Following the efforts of British Columbian protesters, Premier of BC, John Horgan, tweeted, quote, "We stand in solidarity with hashtag Punjab farmers, calling for meaningful dialogue and peace," end of quote. Furthermore, Mr. Horgan requested Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to encourage the Indian government to seek a peaceful solution on farmers' legislation. In support of the farmers, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau became the first international leader to respond in support. And he said, "We've reached out through multiple means to Indian authorities to voice our concerns." In response, Indian officials called the Canadian politicians ill-informed and stated, "Farmers are the victim of misinformation." 2 days later, on December 4th, Justin Trudeau was asked about the concerns regarding his relationship with the Indian government following the backlash from his comment. Trudeau confirmed that Canada will always stand up for the right for peaceful protest. While farmers in India continued their overnight camps across 5 major highways, British Columbians began organizing daily protests on busy intersections to garner the attention and support from local citizens. Protesters began incorporating seva, or selfless service, taught in Sikhism, into their daily protests. In the month of January, the seva was practiced in a variety of ways, including the operation of free education for underprivileged children, free healthcare services, free meals throughout the day for everyone, and much more.
ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਧਰਮ ਦੇ ਸੇਵਾ ਦਾ ਸੰਕਲਪ ਹੈ, ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਾਨਵਤਾ ਤੇ ਭਲੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਪਾਸ਼ੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਦਾ ਮਨ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਹੰਕਾਰ ਨਾਸ਼ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਬਰਾਬਰ ਜਾਣਨ ਦਾ ਗਿਆਨ ਮਿਲਦਾ ਹੈ, ਊਚ ਨੀਚ ਦੂਰ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਭੁੱਖਿਆਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੁਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਸਮਝੀਏ ਵੀ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਤਲਬ ਆਪਣੇ ਇੰਨੇ ਚਿਰਾਂ ਦੇ 9 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਤੋਂ ਬੈਠੇ ਹਨ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲੰਗਰ ਪਾਣੀ ਹਰੇਕ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰਤ ਹੈ। ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀਆਂ ਦੇਖ ਕੇ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਨ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਹਨ।
We fundraised for the last 6 months for a charity called Sahayata. Their farmer support project actually raises money and puts it towards the education finances for the victims of farmer suicide and supporting their families with just providing basic needs, and even to upstream approaches to mitigate the suicide epidemic.
In the last 8 months, farmers have made libraries and volunteered to give the homeless an education. They've made community kitchens to give anyone and everyone food. They've set up a healthcare system within the protest site to help anyone suffering from an illness to a wound. They've made sure to leave the streets of Delhi better than they found them. They planted flowers and trees and washed the streets and kept the environment intact. They've kept everyone there as equal, no matter the caste, age, religion, or gender. Everyone is equal. Even though they're fighting against arguably the most powerful entity in India, they haven't forgotten their roots, and women and children have continued farming, ensuring that the country can continue to eat. They've been denied basic human rights, but will not forget the humanity that prevails.
On January 26th, the Republic Day of India, thousands of protesters came together for a tractor convoy to New Delhi's historic Red Fort. Farmers hoisted a Nishan Sahib, a Sikh flag symbolizing the presence of Khalsa, above the monument. India media channels reported the act as terrorism by the Khalistan, a Sikh separatist movement seeking to create a homeland for Sikhs.
ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਰਾਜ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਨੇ ਆਣ ਕੇ ਗੋਡੇ ਤੇ ਰਾਜ ਦਿਓ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਦੀ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਪ੍ਰਵਾਨ ਪੰਜ ਪ੍ਰਵਾਨ ਪੰਚੇ ਪਾਵੇ ਦਰਗੇ ਮਾਨ ਪੰਜਾਂ ਕਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਇੱਕ ਧਿਆਨ ਪੰਜ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਤੇ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਾਵੋ ਜੋਬਰ ਮੰਗੋ ਸੋਵਰ ਪਾਵੋ ਤੇ ਅਸਾਂ ਕਿਤੇ ਕੋਲ ਰਾਜ ਮੰਗਣਾ ਮੰਗਤਿਆਂ ਕੋਲ ਰਾਜ ਕੀ ਮੰਗਣਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਮੰਗਤੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਅਸਾਂ ਕੀ ਲੈਣਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਨੇਤਰ ਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਬੇਗਮਪੁਰਾ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਕੋਲ ਇਸ ਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤਿੰਨ ਗੁਣੀ ਸੰਸਾਰ ਦੇ ਰਾਜ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਚ ਰੋਜ਼ ਬੰਦੇ ਮਰਨ ਤੇ ਰੋਜ਼ ਮਾਰਨ ਇਹ ਕੋ ਰਾਜ ਹੈ
The way in which I understand the farmers movement in India and the indigenous land defenders movement here and their connections, to me, are about resisting the intersection or the nexus point of capitalism and the nation state. And I think that's what we've seen in both of those movements. So I don't want to, and I wrote, I don't want to make a false equivalency because colonialism is still happening here. And I think that's an important acknowledgement. But I do want to say that as we have transitioned into the 21st century, we are seeing a world in which capital, the nature of capital is changing and the nation state is changing. And so what we're seeing is really a form of politics that exposes populations to premature death and also exploits the land. It exploits the land in the name of capital, and it does it relentlessly. And I think what we see in both of these movements are in numerous movements really across the globe. But when we think about Wet'suwet'en or the tiny house warriors, as well as the Kisaan and Dhillon, we're seeing people defend land. And it's not necessarily the ownership of land. It is it's the relationship to land and what that land means to people.
While I was not born and raised in India, I think that you can't decouple our rootedness from the region of Punjab. And through our practice of Sikhi, agriculture, harvest, all of these things correlate with our coda, how we live our life, our ethos. And so some of the things that I say almost on a regular basis, Pavan Guru, Pani Pita, Mata Tart Mahat, like these things come from our allegorical reference points to nature, agriculture. And so it's almost as if it was like peering through the soul of my being.
On the same day, the creator of AskIndiaWhy.com and Poetic Justice Foundation's founder Mo Dhaliwal did a speech in front of the Consulate General's offices of India in downtown Vancouver, encouraging citizens to open their minds and hearts to Khalistanis. Shortly after, Dhaliwal began being labeled as a Khalistani terrorist on India news channels and articles.
They're trying to tell you that you are separate from Punjab and that you are separate from the Khalistan movement. You are not. And you have to, at some point, you have to understand the feeling and the emotion that the Khalistan group is bringing to this. I just want you to hear this. I want the young people to hear this. The reason why the Khalistani people are so passionate about this is because 40, 50 years later, we are seeing the truth that they predicted in the 1970s. In the 1970s, they wanted an independent land so that we wouldn't have to live through this movement. So my request to all of the young people here is don't close your eyes to each other, don't close your hearts, don't close your...
Anytime they want to drain energy from a Sikh movement, anytime they want
to scatter a group of Punjabis that have organized in some way. They foist this term Khalistan, right? And they've created all sorts of, hateful associations with it and what have you. And as a movement for self-determination that isn't hateful, that doesn't speak out against Hindus, it doesn't speak, anything anti-India, it just speaks for a people and for the rights of those people, right? And in that regard, it's a movement for self-determination and sovereignty. And the United Nations Charter for Human Rights actually guarantees the right for self-determination of a people. And for India to vilify any sort of self-determination movement is incredibly problematic. And that speaks, I think, more to their agenda than anybody else. Ideas are policed, right? Expression is criminalized. And so on the one hand, you had radical Indian nationalists telling us, nobody in Punjab wants Khalistan, it's just you people in diaspora. And so my question there has been since then, how do you know, right? Is it, can we have a referendum in Punjab? Can we do a survey, or would anybody, asking the question be murdered or disappeared, right? And the reality is actually the latter. It's that you can't even have an idea, you can't even have the conversation because it's policed so brutally, right? And unfortunately, some of that oppression and the conditioning of that oppression is visible in our community in diaspora as well, right? Because we bring that vilification, we bring that criminalization of free thought, we bring that with us. So even in diaspora communities, when you're expressing these ideas, your own community members will actually turn on you and be like, no, Khalistan's a bad idea. And I'm saying, good or bad, I'm not here to debate its merits. I'm not a expert on the movement, nor have I been active in the Sangharsh. But what is wrong with having discourse? What is wrong with having conversation around ideas, right? Why is this idea, why we've been taught that it is so evil that it can't even be spoken aloud?
On February 4th, American pop star Rihanna tweeted in support of the farmers and questioned, "Why aren't we talking about this?" Moments later, climate activist Greta Thunberg also showed her support and posted an informational toolkit created by the Poetic Justice Foundation under Mo Dhaliwal and Anita Lal. The rise of support from international citizens and now influential individuals caused counter-protests to begin taking place across India. The protesters burned photographs of Rihanna and Thunberg. Around the same time, India news channels accused Mo Dhaliwal of paying Rihanna $2 million to tweet in support of the farmers.
We created some materials on Ask India Why that were being shared by Greta Thunberg's volunteer network. And as a result, I think we're just kind of permeating the wider community. And in fact, that was our whole crux of doing the campaign, was to actually get many, many people attached to this movement. So in that regard, it did what we wanted it to do, which was to elevate the awareness and elevate the amount of focus that was being put on India. But as far as the conspiracy of Indian media inventing this story that we paid Rihanna $2.5 million and that this was all like a paid and coordinated campaign. So there's a couple of things that become incredibly transparent there. One is the norm for propaganda in India, right? Because it's a very propagandist regime right now, I think their assumption is that everybody operates this way, right? That nobody in the wider world exists with a social conscience. And why would they ever do something unless it was for cash or personal benefit, right? So there's a perspective and a viewpoint that they brought to this. And of course, there was no such conspiracy, but then they had to fabricate one. For a country the size of India and for as many media channels as they have, I mean, they were breathless through February and March of 2021 of continually expanding this conspiracy narrative around myself and a few others that were apparently hell-bent on the destruction of India, right? And for a democracy to be so breathlessly sharing the story and running, interview panels all day, every day, and all the rest of it, and for the rest of the world to not really care is kind of telling as well.
Both Sanskriti and I used to work in the same organization when we were working in the mainstream media, and we realized that there are a lot of problems when you are working in the mainstream media. There are a lot of constraints not every time you can work on stories that you really want to work on and the way you want to work on.
For media, they were like, there was a number. So 1 lakh people, 2 lakh people, nearly 10 lakh people. But for us, they were humans. There were 1 lakh stories.
After 26th of January, I received in one single day thousands of phone calls. I'm not exaggerating. I could not open my phone to make a phone call because by the time I would dial 3 digits, another call would come and disrupt it. So finally, in disgust, I had to shut down my phone, and that kept happening for 5 to 6 days. Now, this is impossible unless you have an organized force with technology, which has decided to invade a phone number. And what they did was that they actually put my phone number on large WhatsApp groups to say, this is Mr. Yadav's private phone number. Please do not call him. Please do not abuse him. Please do not use words of hatred. What does that mean? It means do call Mr. Yadav, do abuse him, and I've saved myself from legal consequences. I mean, I'm personally a victim of that. My Twitter and Facebook accounts were growing a few years ago. Suddenly, my Facebook followership suddenly stopped at 500,000. It stopped growing. Twitter following kept growing. It went up to 1.5 million. Facebook following suddenly stopped growing. I asked some technically smart people. They said, you don't know what the deal Facebook has with the government of India. You don't even know about that BJP and Facebook have a certain understanding that you would not be allowed to grow beyond a point. So this is the level at which these games are played.
If I'm on the field, the priority will always be the mainstream media. They will be given the first access. And then anyone who's doing like freelance work or independent journalists. But here at the protest sites, the farmers were showing more trust on people who are working independently, on the people who are there to cover it for the social media. Basically, they were showing more trust on the people who are not from the mainstream media. And that was something different. That was something that I saw for the first time, because even they realized that someone who is there to cover the protest as an independent, they are not that biased. They might be not that biased as mainstream media.
There are times where big stories that happen in other places in the world do have an impact on people who are living here. The farmers' protest, you would say, that had a huge impact on the Punjabi community here, the South Asian community here, the Sikh community here. A lot of them are farmers here as well, in Abbotsford and in Maple Ridge and the Tri-Cities, Surrey, Richmond, there's a sizable farming, and even into the Okanagan, if you look into that, many of the farmers out there and growers there are Punjabi as well. So there's like a deep-rooted cultural component to that. And that's why it makes it so important for us to kind of delve in and cover some of these issues. It may not be top of mind for every British Columbian, but it's certainly top of mind when it was happening for a significant number of British Columbians who would be impacted by that. And that's why we decided that, hey, this is an issue we should cover. Even though it's something that's happening a half a world away, there are deep roots and deep connections that we also need to understand and reflect and do stories on, because those are a part of our community.
While counter-protests began taking place in India, pressure among pro-Modi groups rose in Canada as farmers' protests continued to take place across the world.
They've had less success in kind of just changing the channel with statements or, quite frankly, misinformed or disinformation driven by India media. The other trick that they can do is either provoke rallies that are happening outside of India and have examples of violence or other examples to say, look, see, we told you guys, these guys can't be trusted. Look, there's this one isolated incident, and therefore we should smear the whole, the movement as it's seen in the diaspora with the same brush. And they're able to do that in a couple of different ways. And one tool that they have used is encouraging and hosting what are known as Tiranga rallies or Tiranga marches, which is marches of the India flag. And this term actually originates in India amongst the BJP, where they'll hold these rallies often in neighborhoods that are densely populated by like minority communities, right? So they'll do this in Muslim communities in India, or they'll do it in other communities in the hopes of provoking a reaction to say, oh, you know, this minority community or this other community is violent, or to demonize another group. We've also seen them here in Brampton, where we live, where they've held a couple actually of these Tiranga rallies, and they'll say, you know, for, you know, this just to show pride in Canada-India relationship, or just show pride in the flag. The timing, though, is not a coincidence, and the neighborhoods aren't a coincidence in which these rallies are held by often folks that are either members or allies of RSS or BJP elements in the West. And so we've seen examples now here in locally here in Brampton, where people held these rallies through, again, densely populated Punjabi or Sikh neighborhoods. And there has been, you know, fights that have broke out that, you know, there's been pretty well covered by Canadian media and otherwise. And the whole purpose is to divert the message and change the channel on the very successful solidarity farmers protests that have been erupting all across the world.
On March 6th, farmers officially completed 100 days at Delhi's borders. A host of activities had been planned throughout the month to mark the occasion. While protesters continued to resist, they also mourned the loss of 248 farmers who died during the 3 months of protests.
I was in India for over 4 months, basically living in a tent under a SkyTrain station. They call it a metro station out there. So the experience itself, I guess it's not for everybody. It's different adapting. You know, the everyday things we take for granted, right? Whether that be a shower, using the restroom, things like that, you'd have to really adapt to.
It's a simultaneous struggle when you are also struggling against the government, against the state, and you're also struggling with your own personal issues. And our privilege of being there on the protest side, sleeping there with them, doing what they do from like morning to evening, gave us that sense of struggle, that everyday struggle, or how hard it is like being there when it was extreme winter or when it was raining heavily. There was water everywhere, and then there were mosquitoes, and like you can't sleep for nights because of mosquitoes. Some days there's no electricity.
The one thing that has that kept going on in my mind throughout this whole experience was the word resilience. I mean, these people are literally like they spend, like Delhi's weather is very, very harsh, both winters or summers or monsoon, and now they have been through the all three seasons, right? Winters and then peak summers and now monsoon also, and they're still there, and they're still there in the same capacity, more or less.
On March 8th, International Women's Day, thousands of women joined the protest site and wore yellow scarves to reflect the mustard fields of Punjab.
It's very tragic for us because neither the state nor the community has ever acknowledged women's participation in the agriculture. Although, like, it's almost 50%. Almost 50% agrarian labor is women, and if we also consider the animal husbandry, this number is much more. But still, their labor or their share is not acknowledged.
When you think about the farmers protesting, you really see this farmer being a man with, you know, a bagan and working away at the fields, tilling the soil. And what I believe we forget about is the women and how much agriculture is built on the backs of women. And so when you think that all these farmers, mostly men, although of course there's a lot of women present as well, but the majority are men, you think, well, one ought to think and probe who's taking care of the fields back at home. And it's the women. And when we also think prior to the protest, how many suicides were in fact Punjabi or Sikh men, farmers that were men, we negate to think about the implications that has on women who are now left without the security of a man, which is very important in that country, considering it's a patriarchal country and the patrilineal land customs make it that the land only belongs to the men. So women never actually own land. So when a farmer commits suicide, the woman does not own that land, the husband does. And if the husband passes away, one can pray that they have a son that it would go to, but what if it doesn't?
And I also remember another story of a young woman named Akbari, who was walked for 11 days along from Bathinda, Punjab to Tikri protest sites in solidarity with the movement. Though Akbari is landless, we asked her that like she is landless, then why is she there? Because it's a farmers' movement. And then she replied, when the land is taken over by the corporate, their dream of owning that land will also be snatched.
ਇਹ ਧਰਤੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਮਾਂ ਵਰਗੀ ਨਾ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਵੀ ਭੁੱਲਿਆ ਏ ਇਹ ਸਭੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਖੇਤਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈ ਕਿਸ ਦਾ ਖੂਨ ਜੋ ਡੁੱਲਿਆ ਏ ਮੈਂ ਥੱਕ ਗਿਆ ਹਾਂ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਅੱਜ ਕਹਿਣ ਦੀ ਹਿੰਮਤ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ ਲਹਿਰਾ ਝੰਡਾ ਸੰਗਰਾਮਾਂ ਦਾ ਅੱਜ ਫੇਰ ਬਗਾਵਤ ਕਰਦਾ ਹਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਕਿਉਂ ਅੱਜ ਨਾ ਮਜ਼ਦੂਰ ਕਹੇ ਜੋ ਧਰਤੀ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਮੇਰਾ ਏ ਜਿਸ ਨੂੰ ਤੂੰ ਆਪਣਾ ਦੇਸ਼ ਕਹੇ ਉਹ ਦੇਸ਼ ਤੇਰਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹ ਮੇਰਾ ਏ.
Specifically with our mural, we decided to have a woman in the center of the image, and that was a twofold reason. One is that women have been partaking in the protests just as much as men have been taking part in the protests, but women often have this extra fold of responsibility and this extra role within the community, and that they are the ones who ground the community and they also pass on our cultural practices. So given that they're the anchor of our communities and our lives, we decided to anchor the image with a woman in the middle as well. To kind of showcase this element, we intentionally draped her with a fulkari because that's something that we all identify as being something traditional. And then we also intentionally draped a chunni around her that was blue in color because we wanted it to look like flowing water. And part of that is to draw attention to the fact that the issues that the farmers are fighting for now are very relevant to past issues, but also to present day issues.
There are numerous hands at the bottom signifying and representing diverse bodies that are holding all of these like common products like garam masala or, you know, like turmeric latte, chai tea, whatever it may be. And that was intentional because we wanted to showcase that all these different demographics, all these different types of people, they all consume what the farmers are producing essentially. And even though we see that, or I guess like as North Americans or people as a part of the diaspora, or even just, you know, non-South Asians, we see these items as luxuries, but truly they're just coming from the farmers who are doing all of this work, who are protesting for their livelihoods. And yeah, people just don't know. And even through the commercialized products and means of, you know, like chai and turmeric or whatever, we always forget who is creating these products for us, like who is actually at the base of getting all of these spices and things like that. We forget that they're the farmers in India, in Punjab, that are really doing all this work. So we wanted to tie that into our image to showcase that it's not just a Punjab issue, as mentioned before, or like an India issue. It's not even just a South Asian issue, it's a global issue.
And just the last section of our mural was basically, there's an older male behind the female, and he's kind of looking back at traditional practices and kind of like reminiscing of the past prior to the introduction of foreign chemicals that polluted the water and just the food chains and the social systems and how kind of the corporations coming in are going to lead to. And we have buildings on the right side of the mural kind of showcasing how everything is trying to get more privatized and more on the corporate spectrum of everything compared to how it used to be when we were so connected and we had more ownership of our own lands. So we just wanted to kind of have the two opposing kind of like the past and the future of where these bills are taking us, kind of comparing one another.
जिंदाबाद लड़ेंगे लड़ रहे हैं महिला शक्ति आई है महिला शक्ति आई है.
On March 11th, the Indian Consulate in Toronto wrote a letter to Ontario's Office of International Relations and Protocol to alert the Canadian authorities to investigate the school board curriculum, as he had learned of teachers adding material of the farmers' protest in India into their classrooms in Ontario. He requested that the school board immediately remove such hateful and factually incorrect material.
It's inappropriate for a foreign government to try to interfere at that school board level. If they do have an issue, there are proper channels to do that from one country to another. And the way that the Indian government has gone about it is quite frankly offensive and wrong. And all it did was just regenerate a conversation again within classrooms, but also brought about a lot of strong statements from trustees and teachers that, how dare you try to interfere in what's happening in our classrooms. And the farmers' protest, again, is a movement that is one of the largest protests in human history. It has been going on for more than half a year now. It has become one of the, like an unprecedented check on Modi's power within India that hasn't happened in the first, term and a half of the Modi administration. So of course, it's incredibly important to teach that in classrooms. And then if you look at the actual schools, the school boards that the consulate wrote these letters to, that we know at least publicly, they may have wrote for other school boards as well. But for the school boards where we know the letter went, York, Peel, and Toronto, so for the most part, your greater Toronto area, those are all school boards with very large Punjabi, Sikh, but also South Asian populations. So student bodies that would be pretty aware of what's going on, student bodies that would be hearing about this, and student bodies that would like the opportunity to speak about this issue with their classmates. So for teachers to provide that space for the students is actually completely uncontroversial.
It's important to add not just the farmers' movement, but there's a lot of global movements that are happening against nation states. And I think it is important to include those so that, when we talk about we want to decolonize the curriculum, which Eve Tuck has written a brilliant article about decolonization is not a metaphor. Decolonization is about decolonizing. And as I said, Maldonado Torres will say decoloniality is a different idea. It's more of a psychological idea. And I think that, it's got to include Indigenous perspectives. It doesn't have to do away with Europe, but it can't be Eurocentric or Western centric or androcentric for that matter. And I think I think when you have the largest peaceful protest in world history, I think that should be included. I think people should know about that. And again, I don't know that I think it should only be important to us. It should be important to all people. As the Indigenous movements, as Black Lives Matter should also be important to us as well.
In April, India was struck by a massive surge of COVID-19. Hospitals across Delhi reported fatal oxygen shortages. Protesters cleared highways for emergency vehicles and those transporting oxygen. As a result, farmers at the protest site began getting vaccinated immediately.
People are not sitting there or living there out of their will. Even at the peak of second wave of COVID, people were sitting there, and it wasn't there like they are getting paid or they are really happy sitting there. They are sitting there because these farm laws are a bigger threat for them. One farmer leader articulated it really well when one media person asked him that why are you still sitting on the morcha because the second wave is on its peak. And he said chances of getting killed with COVID is nearly 2%. But chances of getting killed because of these farm laws is nearly 100% for us.
On May 26th, protesters hosted a Black Flag Day, organized by the Sanyukta Kisaan Morcha to mark 6 months of protests on the borders of Delhi.
We gave a call to Black Flag Day. And within villages, in ordinary households, the call was responded to in a way which has simply stunned the government. They never expected that a movement would be able to get people to put the black flags atop their houses.
On August 15th, India's Independence Day, a sleepout demonstration of support for the farmers' protest occurred globally in cities including Vancouver, Toronto, Seattle, San Jose, London, and Vienna.
The Kisaan Sleepout happening globally after just having started in Vancouver was something that we really wanted. When I think the first secondary location it happened at was in London, and it continues to happen in London every month, just like it continues to happen in Vancouver every month. And it happened sheerly by people reaching out, asking us how they can organize it in their city, and then us hopping on a Zoom call and explaining to them how we did it and guiding them through the process and helping them set it up for where they live.
हमको ये लगता है कि बाहर जो हमारे परिवार के लोग रहते हैं वे भी बड़े चिंतित रहते हैं और वे और कुछ नहीं कर सकते, तो एक रात आंदोलन की तरह सड़क पे बिताते हैं, तो उनकी जो फीलिंग होगी वहां पे उनको कैसे फील होगा, तो वो एहसास करवाते हैं और पूरा देश और दुनिया इस चीज को देखेगी कि भारत में जो हो रहा है हम भी उनके साथ में हैं। वो एक आदमी करे या 100 आदमी करे, आपकी जो भावनाएं हैं वो देश के साथ में जुड़ी हुई हैं, किसानों के साथ में पूर्ण रूप से जुड़ी हुई है, तो ये एक अच्छी फीलिंग आती है हमारे उसमें। और ये लगता है कि भाई हमारे परिवार बाहर भी हैं तो हमको याद रख रहे हैं।
When we sleep, the farmers are awake, and when they sleep, we're awake and we're protesting. So this is a never-ending movement.
On November 19th, 1 week before the one-year mark of Delhi Chalo, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the repeal of the farm laws. On November 29th, 3 days after the one-year mark, the bills were officially repealed in Parliament. After a year of continuous protests, farmers celebrated this monumental victory.
किसानों को हरियाणा में ही रोक लिया जाए, दिल्ली बॉर्डर तक उनको पहुंचने ना दिया जाए, वो नौबत।
Though the laws have been repealed, questions of India's democracy, violence, and oppression remain among farmers of India and global citizens who continue to keep a watch internationally. The fight for a livelihood, a culture, and an identity cost the innocent lives of over 750 protesters. During the official repeal of the laws, the government failed to acknowledge the lives that were lost. They also failed to ensure support or security for the farmers. No discussions, debates, or accountability were provided in the Parliament of India or by Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
That means they go home to the poisoned soil, the poisoned rivers. That means they get to go back to live the same life of subsistence they've been living this whole time. If the farm bills get repealed tomorrow, that is not a victory. This battle begins with the repeal of the farm bills. It does not end there. If anybody tells you that this battle is going to end with the repeal of the farm bills, that is because they're trying to drain energy from this movement.
I'm here at Scott Road 72 as part of the farmers' protest movement. I'm a Delta resident. I've been protesting here now for 6 months, since December. It's really important for our community, especially the diaspora, to be involved. Despite the fact that many of us are born and raised in Canada, that doesn't mean that we have forgotten our homeland, that our roots are still back in Punjab.
ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਮੋਰਚੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਖੜੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਕਿਸਾਨ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਖਾਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਵਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਥੇ 223 ਦਿਨ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਆ
ਅਗਰ ਅੰਨ ਉਗਾਏਗਾ ਫਾਰਮਰ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੋਕ ਰੱਜ ਕੇ ਰੋਟੀ ਖਾ ਸਕਣਗੇ
ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਿਸ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਤੇ ਖੜ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਹਦਾ ਵਰਣਨ UN ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਹੋਇਆ ਤੇ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਪਰੀਮ ਕੋਰਟ ਨੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਵਰਣਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਬਾਹਰ ਵਾਲੇ ਲੋਕ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਕਾਨੂੰਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਵਿਰੋਧ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ